Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. When the Israel Defense Forces Operation Northern Arrows stopped being only defensive and added an incursion into Southern Lebanon, the concern that it will not be limited to that area and Israel's fight against Hezbollah was naturally heightened. Iran has been sponsoring and guiding the Lebanese Shiite militia for its own purposes. Will it sit idly by and let Hezbollah be thoroughly defeated, having lost too much already, including its entire high command, or will it intervene, drawing Israel into a direct war with it, also engulfing other regional nations and perhaps forcing an American intervention a month before the U.S. presidential elections? To analyze all that and more, we're joined all the way from Washington, D.C. by Mr. Marshal Billingslea, who formerly served as the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, an Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Countering Terror Financing, and currently a Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute. It's great to see you, Marshal. Also joining us from Central Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, who formerly served as the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, as well as an Israeli Air Force commander and a fighter pilot. It's great to see you, Yaron.
Good to see you.
With me here in the studio, our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, reports indicate that it's going to potentially be very interesting tonight.
So it's a foregone conclusion that Iran is responding. But the question is whether it's going to be symbolic or substantial. If it's only going through the motions because it's a domestic audience and its various proxies are awaiting and expecting a response, they have ever since Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader, was assassinated while being a guest of the regime in Tehran. Iran at that time did not respond, even though it turns out that it tried to recruit Israelis to assassinate Israeli officials. It wasn't a very sophisticated plot, or perhaps several plots, and it was uncovered by the Israeli security agencies. So perhaps this was to be a substitute. But no longer is this the case. Obviously, after the stunning series of blows which Hezbollah has undertaken, has absorbed over the last 2 weeks, ever since in mid-September, beepers started exploding all over Lebanon and culminating in the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and now the overt incursion into South Lebanon, even though it turns out that for the last 200 nights and many dozens of days, there have been special operations by Israeli forces. Iran cannot sit idly by, to answer your introductory question. And therefore, we will have to see first, will it be serious about wishing to hurt Israel, whether it will be successful, and whether Israel, perhaps limited by American wishes on the eve of the presidential election, will decide to retaliate, and how severely.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. Mr. Billingslea, how do you read the situation at the moment, particularly at a time when the United States, which is the superpower of the 21st century, is standing by and more of a spectator than an actual proactive participant in deterring our enemies and adversaries?
Well, it's great to be with you again, Jonathan. A lot has happened since we last spoke, and it is commendable that the Israeli government took matters into its own hands and finally removed Hassan Nasrallah, as well as most of the senior leadership team of Hezbollah. That's a significant action. The United States should not have been a bystander. We should have been an active supporter and participant in that operation. But unfortunately, this particular administration is largely missing in action and is so easily deterred that the hand-wringing that has ensued since then has been quite troubling and substantial. back in February, Jonathan, if you'll recall, I speculated, I warned that if Hezbollah continued its provocations, that Israel would have no choice but to go into southern Lebanon. I'm actually quite amazed at how restrained the government has been, and that it has taken this long for Israel to move into the areas adjacent to the northern cities. The situation's intolerable with respect to all of the refugees, the displaced people, the Israeli citizens who have been forced out of their homes in the north. And so this incursion into the north to remove the terror threat, to remove the indirect fire threat, is a necessary and long-awaited action.
Thank you, Mr. Billingslea. General Rosen, is now the time to utilize an Iranian attack against Israel directly in order to go after the Iranian critical infrastructure, potentially even its nuclear program, with the various installations being a prime target for any military at this point in time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, and the point in time that we are at right now points to, when you look at what Nasrallah did in his last moments, he made like a series of strategic miscalculations that led to his own death, along with all of his leadership, basically crippling the command and control of this very, very sophisticated terror military. And basically what we have right now is Iran needing to sort of, shoot back just to show it's here. But now the chess, the playing field is very different after the last two or so weeks. Iran's insurance policy, Hezbollah, is mostly decapitated, and that has huge implications for the whole region. It has a huge implication on Iran's calculus. Now, I'm asking myself, if I'm now Khomeini and the whole military apparatus, what am I going to do now? I don't have the leverage that I had 3 weeks ago. The level of intelligence penetration that Israel showed, both in Lebanon and in Iran, shows that someone needs to be very, very careful how he reacts and how he shoots back at Israel. So, in summary, I think that Iran is very weakened on the strategic leverage, from a strategic leverage point of view, with Hezbollah decapitated. And now, sort of, they're trying to show that they're not deterred, but if they just shoot back something small, basically it says that they understand that their threat is not credible, and that it is right now Iran's big test. Now, if Iran does a full-fledged attack, it might bear some very serious consequences, because Israel, after these last 3 weeks, cannot take its foot off the pedal, because otherwise it won't be credible, taking care of the deterrence that it has rebuilt in just 3 weeks, very skillfully. So I think that the next 24 hours, again, if I listen to all the channels and the intelligence that the open source intelligence that's flowing in, I think that maybe Khomeini and the Iranian regime is going to make a huge miscalculation. And actually, I don't mind if they make that, and it might be maybe the moment to go for the head of this snake.
Dude. Mr. Oren, I've been hearing this more and more from senior officials, that they hope Iran will make that miscalculation to allow it to, or to essentially grant Israel the legitimacy to go after vital infrastructure in Iran. How does Iran go about this? And we just saw also a meeting between the Russian prime minister and the president of Iran, followed by a statement coming out of the Kremlin warning Israel to immediately withdraw its forces from southern Lebanon. Of course, is this something more to it than just the mere statement of it?
Well, there is this double linkage, first between the Lebanese crisis and what happens in Gaza, with a Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal, presumably bringing about another ceasefire along the Lebanese border. And the other linkage has to do with your direct question between the Israeli incursion and whatever happens between Iran and Israel. It is not necessary for the second linkage to take place, but this is obviously the conventional wisdom. Now, what is the political purpose of the Israeli incursion? It is to drive Hezbollah north of the Litani River, to destroy its positions and infrastructure and arsenal and whatever they still have left there, and to bring about the negotiations over a diplomatic arrangement which will enable the residents of the Galilee to feel secure enough to go back home and start rehabilitating their communities. Now, one cannot really measure this sense of security, but we will know it when we see it. When Hezbollah has been beaten so badly, not only in Beirut and down its chain of command, but also between the Litani and the border, it will be obvious to everyone. So this operation should not take so long to achieve its purposes.
Just a couple of weeks, I assume?
Maybe even less. And then we will see whether Russia and China and all the other peace-loving nations of the world are willing to support a resolution which will be enforceable, a very strengthened version of 1701, with Hezbollah disarmed, Hezbollah displaced, and a UNIFIL or another UN force and the Lebanese military going back, and obviously with an Israeli overwatch, because otherwise Israeli civilians have seen too much for too many years in order to be duped just by promises.
I wonder whether or not 1701 is enough, because to reinforce 1701, obviously that's an Israeli interest, but wouldn't it be prudent to go also and call on the international community to push for a reinforced 1559, which is about in the composition of Lebanon and the necessity to disarm all of the various proxies and militias operating in that country?
Well, I'm sure Marshal can answer it much better than I am. The problem, of course, with Lebanon is that it is a failed state. It's fragile. Who knows how much you can push it without its breaking apart? But why go back only to 1559? Why not go back to 425 of 1978, which was the basis for UNIFIL after the so-called Litani operation? Up to now, the Israeli incursion resembles not any of the Lebanon wars, but the Litani operation, which after a week has achieved its purposes. Of course, after several years, again, the enemy of the time, it was the PLO rather than Hezbollah, restarted firing at Israel, and Israel eventually went back into Lebanon.
Mr. Billingslea, you're one of the few who has the killed or slain commander of the Quds Force, RGC Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani, dealing with him in multiple resolutions. And I wonder, as the man who devised the current Iranian strategy and has worked so tirelessly to bring about, and also it cost his life, of course, to bring about this composition of very prudent pressure points throughout the region via various proxies. Is this enterprise right now at the beginning of its end, or are we just at the grace of the next U.S. administration that will ultimately have to come and reinforce its escalation dominance vis-a-vis not only the Islamic Republic of Iran, but Russia and China potentially in the Middle East?
Well, I think both things will need to happen. The terror apparatus that Soleimani devised, funded, and directed is brittle at this stage, with Hamas leadership largely eradicated, with Hezbollah at the moment, for all intents and purposes, thoroughly decapitated. The Houthi leadership is another part of the structure that needs to be targeted in the coming days and eliminated. And my hope would be that, and I think this is far-fetched given the realities on the ground in Lebanon, but my hope would be that the Lebanese armed forces and the Christian militias and Amal, even Amal, would step forward and finish off the vestiges of Hezbollah now to free their country from this Iranian cancer.
With that being said, Amal is considered to be the staunchest ally of Hezbollah, irrespective of this various spats they've had in recent years over Hezbollah's inability to basically pay the Amal operatives during the previous administration when you served in office. Nonetheless, now that they were able to basically accommodate the necessities of Amal, Hezbollah was pretty much the dominant force when talking about all of the Shiite militias operationally in Lebanon.
Well, that's very true. At the same time, I've sat down with Navi Berri several times, and he knows an opportunity when he sees it.
Fair enough. General Rosen, to what end does Israel need to push in Lebanon beyond the fundamentals of returning the residents of northern Israel to their communities safely, also with a sense of security, which requires, of course, certain activities beyond the scope of 1701. But are we going to also potentially seize certain strategic opportunities to further degrade Iran's regional strategic structure?
Yes, I think that, again, going back to what you just asked previously, I think that, giving Lebanon back to the Lebanese, if you will, is the ultimate goal of everything going on right now. And doing that by decapitating Hezbollah is the number one goal. We really need our neighbor in the north to be a normal state, whatever state it wants to be, but just a normal state with a functioning government and military that is responsible for its own sovereignty. Now, having said that, I think that I'm hearing a few other thoughts that are sort of discussions on how well do we need to finish Hezbollah, and actually it goes all the way down to the south to Hamas, because the prerequisite of anything happening from here forward is to really finish those two. Now, it's two very different cases, right? Hamas is a much more complicated situation because it's not really a state, and it's intertwined with the Judea and Samaria and the Palestinian, the whole Palestinian Authority and the whole Palestinian challenge and problem. Lebanon is a country, and there's no voids. There are serious countries that are supporting Lebanon, namely the United States and France. And I think that when we have Hezbollah as sort of a shadow state within a state, there's no way Lebanon will go back to the Lebanese. But now that we have maybe, we're not there yet. I know that people really want to think like that, and there is sort of euphoria around this. There's still a lot of work to eliminate Hezbollah. Hezbollah, first of all, is the third south part of Lebanon, the Shiite part of Lebanon, is Hezbollah. It's embedded within Lebanon. So it's not that if we decapitate everyone, suddenly Lebanon goes back to the Lebanese, but at least it is the first step towards such an arrangement that sort of levels the overpower that Hezbollah had, crippling the economy, the military, and the political level of Lebanon as a normal state. They don't have a president for, I think, over a year because Hezbollah doesn't want them to have a government, a functioning government, and that goes all the way back to Iran. So now there is a real chance to sort of reshape, cut the tentacles of this Iranian octopus, and start Iran now naturally. Well, what it should do when it's under attack, it will retract, it will go back, and it will reconsider all of the many years of investment in this terror military, namely Hezbollah, but also the Houthis and the Iraqi Hezbollah and all these. And it just shows how important it is, and we've been speaking about this for the last year, how important it is for the whole international community to press on this Iranian octopus, on all its tentacles, in order to make it retract, and then we can deal with Iran much, much easier. And Israel has opened the door very successfully to this process, but it's not going to end if the United States and the Europeans don't join this effort and press on, both militarily and politically, on Iran and the Russians and the Chinese and everything you mentioned before.
Mr. Billingsley, your take?
No, I agree with that. I would add economically as well. The Biden administration walked away from the sanctions that we had on the Iranians in the Trump administration and has rewarded Iran with more than $100 billion in oil revenues, in hostage payments, and other windfalls. And flush with cash, it's only a matter of time that Iran will rebuild the terror apparatus unless Israel keeps relentless pressure on the organization. I agree that Hezbollah is down, but far from out. But what needs to happen is Israel needs to keep up the surgical operations so that eventually the LAF realizes they're at a tipping point, and the Lebanese armed forces, we've spent billions on them. They need to lead the effort for Lebanon to take their country back from this terror group.
Mr. Oren, Iran won't sit idly by and see its most potent, or what used to be its most potent force, potentially its most loyal force, pretty much plunging into hell, let's put it that way.
Well, an elderly couple or a single person, of course, puts his money over the years in a retirement fund for the autumn of his years, as Frank Sinatra used to sing. But sometimes there is an emergency and one has to cash in the pension fund. And Iran has to consider whether protecting Hezbollah might cost it what is even more precious to Iran, which is its nuclear infrastructure. Now, obviously, we should not only hope, but also strive for the best, but try not to confuse an assessment, a cool assessment, with wishful thinking. And it is best to lower expectations that what happened to Hezbollah since mid-September dooms it. I go back to the example of the Algerian FLN. After Ben Bella and his colleagues were arrested in Egypt, they were hijacked by the French. The expectation was that the Algerian revolt would be over. But apparently it was based on popular sentiment, and de Gaulle didn't want to invest more and more in a failing cause. So it's too early to tell whether Hezbollah is doomed. We have to push it some more and then try and see what the balance is.
Indeed. Well, we're drawing near to the end of the program, and we have time for one sentence from each of you. So, Mr. Billingsley, we'll start with you. What are we to expect in the next week or two, and what should the respective governments focus on within the context, of course, of the alliance?
I believe that the Iranians will engage in a massive retaliation if they're able. And so, my thoughts and prayers are with the state of Israel in the coming hours.
General Rosen?
I agree to that assessment. I think we better open our umbrellas right now. It's going to rain. And I think that I would like to see the United States step in and namely allow the IDF to, from a defensive perspective, to concentrate, to focus on defending the airspace, the Israeli airspace from projectiles, missiles from the 360 degrees that we're getting from our enemies. And on the offensive side, I would expect at least the United States to take care of the Houthis and also with Iran directly if needed. That's what I think the United States should do. I mean, if you look at what Israel did just in the last few weeks to the Houthis, tell me why the United States and allies did not do that in the last year. Or, I mean, what are we talking about? So I would really expect that to happen, and I think that's the minimum thing that I would expect.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Rosen, Mr. Billingsley, and Mr. Oren, of course, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli air and missile defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.